We have now some fantastic keynote speakers to share with you. The Big Feels Club, I think we can all relate to that as a saying. I'd like to introduce Graham Panther, who identifies as he, him. He's a co-founder of the Big Feels Club, a global peer-led mental health initiative, lived experience-led program, evaluation, co-design, and workforce development. Against him, probably you could be against him. Working alongside him is Honor Eastley, identifying as she, her, who is the founder and co-director of the Big Feels Club, a mental health innovation and reform, and an Australian Mental Health Prize winner in 2021. Welcome to both of you. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks so much,
Thanks
Jess.
so much. And I can attest, sometimes we are working against each other, even if we're supposed to be on the same team.
So how good is it to be at the Perspectives Conference, first of all? Everyone's always telling me I need more perspective, so this is quite a good sort of place for me to be, I feel. I'm Graham. This is Honor. You're going to hear a bit more about what Big Feels Club's all about shortly. We want to start this little chat with an audio clip from one of the things we do, which is a little podcast called Big Feels at Work. The Big Feels at Work podcast is basically a place for mental health professionals to be a little bit more honest about what it's like to work in this field when you've also got your own big mental health stuff going on. And the clip I want to share, just to start to kind of introduce you to our topic, is from a really fantastic lady called Tammy Allen, who used to be the New Zealand Mental Health Commissioner, is now the South Australia Mental Health Commissioner, but came into this work from her own lived experience. Like so many of us came into this work through having her own big stuff. So she's in some really high up seats for someone who's come in through this, as we'll talk about in this talk, who's come in through the back door, right? But Tammy, interestingly, like so many of us, despite being really fancy and, spoiler alert, extremely competent, really struggles with imposter syndrome. And so that's what our interview on this episode of Big Feels at Work was about. I want to share this particular quick clip of how she reacted when she first got the letter from the Governor General saying, "You've been named a mental health commissioner." So we'll just hear
So
from Tammy.
firstly, it's not just the first 1 or 2 years. I live with imposter syndrome all the time, and I'm constantly kind of battling with it. When I got a letter from our Governor General saying you've been appointed to the commission, I literally picked up the phone, dialed the number at the bottom and going, there's someone else that's like similar spelling to me. Are you sure? Like, honestly, if I'm the best person for this role, we're fucked. That was pretty much how I thought of it at the time.
All right. So opening phrase for our talk is, if I'm the best person for this role, we're fucked. No, that's kind of a feeling, right? And so we're going to dive into that feeling, that feeling of self-doubt. We'll go to that next slide. The things we're going to look at today, really 3 topics. 1, reasons why it's easy to doubt yourself in this work. I often call it this weird and wonderful work of working from your own personal messy life stuff. Secondly, why self-doubt might actually be a good thing in this work. And we're going to see if we can sell you on that by the end of the talk. And then lastly, 1 simple thing that can help all this doubty, messy work feel less scary and confusing. Next slide. First of all, who the hell are we? So Jess shared a little bit of who we are. So my name is Graham Panther. I've worked in mental health for nearly 20 years now, actually. That's slightly out of date. Gosh. But I've done a bunch of stuff. I've set up a bunch of mental health services. I've run the Big Feels Club, which is our initiative we'll tell you more about in a second. But the not on the CV stuff is I started in this work because I went crazy in my early 20s, basically. And I started in my scrambling around for meaning after some not so helpful experiences of asking for help when I was younger. I ended up working in mental health as something called a peer support worker, which I'd never heard of before. Most people hadn't heard of it back then. And that ended up being the beginning of a whole career and journey in mental health. Honor, you have a similar story.
Yeah, very similar. I originally worked in the arts, and then I had been dealing with my own, varieties of mental health struggles for about 10 years. And I didn't know what a peer worker was, but I was like, oh, oh, that looks interesting. I could get paid to do that. All right. And so I started working in one of the first youth peer support teams in Australia, and then went on to train a bunch of peer workers across Australia, and then working in a variety of different projects. But one of the big ones was I worked on the Royal Commission that we had in Victoria a few years back, and then working on leading some of those projects in the rollout. Yeah.
So one of the things we're going to talk about is how sometimes what looks really neat and packaged on the surface in terms of our careers or our achievements can actually have some messy stuff boiling underneath. So we'll get to that. But I would love to hear what your roles are. If those of you who are working in mental health, I'd love to hear in the chat what sorts of roles you're in. Those of you who aren't working in mental health yet but are sort of dipping a toe, I'd love to hear what brought you to this conference, what brought you to this talk. So please tell us who's out there and why you're here. That'd be really awesome. Meanwhile, I'm going to hand over to Anna to tell you a little bit more about Big Feels Club.
Awesome. Thanks for that. So to tell you a little bit about Big Feels Club, I'm going to start with a little story. So about 10 years ago, I was in a psych hospital. So at that point, I had been, I'd been struggling with my mental health for about 10 years at that point. I was always an anxious cat, but when my anxiety would get really overwhelming, which it often was, I'd go through, just to give you a sense of what my experience is, I'd go through these really intense periods of being quite suicidal that usually went for about 6 months or so. I worked out the other day, I probably spent maybe 4 years of my 20s in that kind of really doomtown mental space. And I had no trouble asking for help. I tried all the therapy meds, but I was really worried about where this trajectory was going when I was 10 years in and in a psych ward. I was like, I don't know where this is heading. And so go to the next slide. I remember sitting in this group therapy session and I got handed a graph like this. And it was basically about, recovery isn't linear. There can be ups and downs. And I'm just really curious if anyone's, when I got handed this, there was a burning question I had. And I'm curious if anyone can think of what it might be. You're probably familiar with this, but if you got handed it, what might the question be?
I suppose another way to ask that is what information is missing on this helpful
what information
guide
is missing on this helpful
to
guide?
recovery? Can I guess? Oh,
You can guess.
Jessica's saying
that it's always upwards. That's
yep,
good. I like that. Yes,
yep,
that is good. That's really good, Jess.
Yep, that's definitely part of what's missing.
I had
Emma's saying how to actually get there. That would be quite helpful, wouldn't it?
Nice. All of these are great questions. I had
here we go. Jane's onto the one you're getting at, which is how much.
Yes,
how
Jane,
much time?
How much time? We have time. How much time? So I was in hospital and I spoke to a lovely lady called Pam. And if you go to the next slide, Pam said 2 years is the amount of time. And I thought, wow, 2 years is still a long time. But but I can do 2 years. I can make 2 years work. The problem was it wasn't actually 2 years. And if you go to the next slide, the recovery journey looked a bit more like this. And you guys in the chat have really been speaking to that, which is it was not, even if it had ups and downs, it was not linear. In fact, there were periods where I was like, I think I've worked this out. And then I was like, actually, no, I definitely haven't. And if this is it, and for us, like one thing we're really interested in is if this is your experience, if your recovery journey is really messy, what's the kind of things that you're going to be thinking about yourself in that process? And so if you just go to the next slide, this is kind of how we think about it. It's like, actually, if you feel like your recovery journey doesn't fit with this narrative that you feel like you should be, that you have this like, I'm uniquely bad at this, I'm a lost cause, like I should stop trying. But actually these kinds of messy journeys, and we have the celebration of the messiness, it's actually a lot more common than people realize. We know that, for instance, 3 out of 4 people who are struggling with anxiety, depression in Australia, they'll still be struggling with it in 4 years, even if they have accessed help. So we often talk about the rates of mental health struggles. I'm sure everyone knows about the 1 in 5 or the 1 in 4 each year. But what we don't really talk about is what recovery actually looks like. And so that is why we made Big Feels Club. We thought, wouldn't it be great to hear from other people along this long and messy path? If you can go to the next slide. In terms of what we do, we make podcasts, articles, we do talks, workshops, meetups, digital programs, and on to the next slide. And we've had a great response so far. We've had over 1 million downloads of our articles and podcasts. We've had about 2,500 people through our programs, and praise from all kinds of crazy places like the New York Times and Time and stuff like that, which we'll talk about a little bit. But most importantly, we've gotten feedback kind of like this. If you can go to the next slide. It says, prior to the Big Feels Club featuring my life, I thought I was a uniquely effed up weirdo. I can't express via email how much it has helped. Life is so much more bearable. So basically, that is what we do. And all of this might sound pretty impressive, but the key information that we want to give you today is that pretty much every step of the way with what we've done and with the other work that we've done in the mental health space, we have been racked with self-doubt about how to do it best and where we should even go next. In other words, lived experience advocacy, lived experience work, and mental health work can feel a lot like that recovery graph that I just showed you before, of it being like meandering and you're thinking, oh, I'm bad at this. I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, no. So today we want to explore that a little and basically give it its due, because we think self-doubt sometimes gets a bad rap. Over to you, Graham.
Beautiful. Thank you, Anna. I'm seeing some lovely thoughts in the chat already. Jane saying there is no answer. You go back, you go forward, and then back to the beginning. Renee saying, I'm 100% messy. I love that. And Lambrina saying, even the word recovery isn't for everybody. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's like any word in mental health, right? We kind of can get to a point where even if it was the right word to start with, it then gets kind of used so much that it's worth checking in and going, what do we mean by that? So yeah, I guess in a nutshell, Big Feels Club came out of something that both Honor and I were desperately looking for, which was just a little bit more honesty about the messiness of this stuff. Because as Honor's pointed out, messy is normal. If 3 out of 4 people are still struggling years after asking for help, well, then Just Ask for Help is just the beginning. If Just Ask for Help is just the beginning, we need to talk about what happens next. So that's what we do. And we do it through essentially just kind of sharing some of our own mess, sharing some of other people. You know, we have sort of various guests on our shows, various guest writers. We do events, all sorts of stuff. It's all essentially, we often call it a collective experiment in feelings. And it can sort of, our answer of what Big Feels Club is changes year to year, which I think kind of fits the theme. So, okay, what are we going to do today? We're going to just throw a few examples at you, first of all, as a little bit of evidence for A, the fact that most of us find this stuff confusing in some way, and B, why that might actually be a good thing. So we're going to start with a couple of reasons why we might doubt ourselves in this work. So reasons why we doubt ourselves. Reason number one, my knowledge base feels gooey. What do we mean by that? So Alan Watts, who's a philosopher from the mid-20th century, had this great line about how in the world there's prickly people and gooey people. Prickly people are sort of, they might have really clean and neat credentials. Gooey people might be kind of more, they've learned things from the school of life. And the problem is that the world is really prickly goo and gooey prickles. So they're kind of both right. But we need to get better at listening to each other and kind of sharing what we know. So anyway, in that spirit, we have this idea that lived experience is essentially a kind of gooey knowledge base, right? And I say that with all deference to how much richness and wisdom there comes from it, from goo. But by contrast, clinicians have years of university training, often a whole lot of placements before they start working in earnest. They have little letters after their name, often, if they're lucky. We don't tend to get that. One thing I will say, quoting Tammy Allen again, our mental health commissioner from the beginning, she used to say, so Tammy and I actually worked together years ago. We started work together as peer workers many, many years ago. And she used to talk about how she actually had a QBE. That was her qualification. And I used to say, okay, Tammy, what's a QBE? And she would say, qualified by experience. So feel free to put QBE in your email signature. But typically, clinicians, especially bureaucrats, politicians, part of their job description is to be confident, is to be sort of at least sound sure of themselves. We'll get in a minute to some examples of where clinicians absolutely don't feel that way, because a lot of clinicians, spoiler alert, have self-doubt too. But in general, there's kind of this expectation that clinical roles, politicians, bureaucrats are kind of all speaking from a place of certainty, expertise. What's our equivalent? Our equivalent is messy life experience. And so, as Anna's already pointed out with the recovery graph, that by definition isn't so clear. So what is the implication of that is kind of the question here. And the example we want to give for this one of my knowledge base feels gooey is making a podcast that we made a few years back with the ABC called No Feeling is Final. So this is probably one of our most well-known things we've done. This is a memoir podcast about Anna's experience, as she mentioned, of being suicidal many, many different times throughout her 20s and doing all the things you're supposed to do and finding it was a little bit more complicated than just ask for help. This was a story we made 8 years ago with the ABC, and we just want to share a little bit of insight into, at that time, how it felt to make that. So Anna.
Yeah, so we like how it came out, but the process of pitching it was in some ways quite extraordinary. So ABC had this $1 million podcasting fund. This was back in like 2018, I think. And you could pitch a show about anything at all. And at the time, I'd been working in mental health for a little while, and I'd also been on my own recovery journey for quite a while. And I was like, wow, there's really nothing that kind of speaks to just how complex this experience is, or not heaps of it anyway, and not at the kind of level of what ABC might make. And so I put in this pitch, but I originally wanted to make something that was more kind of documentary, that was like, we're going to speak to like experts and clinicians and case studies and all that kind of stuff, like quite a regular documentary story, to kind of talk about like, how can we improve the system? How can we improve mental health care? But then I spoke to one of the ABC producers in the process, and he was like, for this to actually be really engaging, it needs to hang off one person's story for it to really work. And I was like, well, I do have like, I don't know, 10 years of audio diaries just on a hard drive. So I suppose we can do it about me. And that's how it kind of became about me. But I think, speaking to this point around not knowing the answer, what was hard was at the moment that I was pitching that, I was actually in a really dark place. And so I wasn't coming to this project from a place of like, I have the answer. The answer is we just need more X, Y, Z. I was coming to it from a deeply gooey, messy place. And what was really useful about that process, and that a lot went in to make it work really well, but was that when the show really reflects that. And so when the show came out, that was a bunch of the feedback was, oh, I really like how you did not end this in a nice, neat bow. And so, and we got a lot of quotes kind of like this one.
Can I read that one out?
Yeah, go for it.
So this is one of our listeners saying, I listened to your podcast last night. I couldn't stop crying. I've never felt so understood in all my life. I'd given up hoping I might ever hear it spoken by another person who wasn't just trying to imagine, but who knows. Truly, thank you. It means so much.
So we mentioned this kind of as an example of like leaning into this lived experience strength, which is actually not having a really clear, like, this is it, but reflecting what the reality is for people. And people got a lot out of it. And so part of our provocation for today is, what if that kind of messiness, that gooiness, was exactly what we need more of? And we're going to do a little question now, which is, Oh no, the interactive bit. We've got a couple of questions that we're going to ask y'all, and you can answer in the chat. But this question is, in your kinder, less self-judgy moments, what do you think that you've learned from your messy life experience, even if it's still a work in progress? So we're going to give you a minute to think on that and pop your answers in the chat.
We have some delightful hold music in the meantime. This combination of music and these words is already making me well up. This is
I know.
beautiful. Meryl's saying, it's okay to be a gooey mess. A quote from a presentation I did in 2021. Great minds think alike, Meryl. Ezra's saying, the approach of trying to figure out what was wrong with me so I could fix it and be well was probably the problem all along. So interesting, isn't it? One of the things we really explore with Big Feels Club is sometimes the answer is just finding other people asking the same big questions. And that doesn't mean you don't desperately want an answer, but there's something about, yeah, if I focus too hard on needing a fix, then I feel like a problem.
Yeah, there's so many great quotes in here. I'm like, we need to save this chat. Every time we do this, because we do these kinds of presentations, and every time we go, we're always like, hopefully someone answers. And pretty much every time it's always, then you're afraid, you're like, hopefully people answer, but then you're also afraid that you're going to start crying because the responses are so good. Yeah, that my lived experience, even when unfinished, has value. Not just for others, but for me too. That was from Lembrina.
There's a lot in that word unfinished too, isn't there? Because I mean, when we looked at that that updated recovery graph, it didn't really have an endpoint, did it? One of the things we talk about in some of our other talks that we do is what Anna calls falling in love with the process. Like if you don't know when the finish line is, we've really got to sort of maybe think about how we look after the runner. Okay, we might keep going, and there'll be more little interactive bits as well. Is this me or you?
It's you, baby.
It's me. All right, reasons we doubt ourselves, number 2. We often came into this work through the back door. What do I mean by that? So I didn't come into mental health by doing a psych degree. I came into mental health by having a breakdown. Shout out to anyone else in the same boat. Now, they're not mutually exclusive, but this was my way in. I had a kind of interesting few run-ins with mental health services in my teens, but shit really hit the fan in my early 20s after a bad single experience smoking weed that basically didn't go so well for a couple of years, which I've written about a lot in Big Feel Stuff if you're interested. But the kind of nutshell was, here I was thinking I was training in one career and then ending in this whole very different place. And we just want to explore the reality of that. Like, on the one hand, sure, I was bringing in all this rich lived experience already. But on the other hand, I genuinely had skills gaps because I wasn't coming in through the front door. So I could know in my bones that things could be better in mental health in the system purely from the experiences I'd already had at that tender age. But that didn't mean that I magically knew the first thing about how to run an advocacy campaign, how to influence strategic direction in a big organization, how to improve policy, or to be honest, for several years of my career, what even policy was. It's one of those words that kind of sounds like impressive and like I should know what that is. I know we've got at least one policy worker in the chat, so, shout out to them for knowing what policy is. But, this stuff takes time to learn and work out and figure out, all the whilst, well, you're probably still dealing with your mental health stuff. So a bit of a complex soup. Couple of examples we want to share on this one. So one is another clip from our podcast, Big Fields of Work. So this is from Arandathi Jayakody, who some of you may know. Arandathi is like now one of the real amazing consumer leaders in Victoria. She's a board member of Mind Australia, bringing a lived experience perspective to the role of a board member, which is really cool. But she started more than 10 years ago in an entry-level project worker job at Mind Australia. So the very place she started is now the place she's on the board of, which is fascinating. And I talked to her about this on the pod on Big Fields at Work. And I just said, hey, when you first started at Mind in that project worker role, did you ever think one day I'm going to be one of those fancy board members that we hide from in the hallways? Here's what she said.
Absolutely not, Graham. You've got to understand, I went to that job almost like a survival thing. And also I thought, I don't want a demanding job. I need to look after myself. And when I started at Mind, getting through 5 days was exhausting by Friday. Back then, that was success for me. Working 5 days, bringing in a paycheck, all that stuff. That's all I wanted. I was not aspiring for anything else.
So I really, really relate to what Arandithi's saying there. Like when I was first working in mental health, part of it was the thing we often say, right? Which was I was just so drawn to wanting to make sure other people didn't have the same hard experience I did, drawn to wanting to help. But the other side of it is, well, it's an entry-level job and I didn't have any qualifications. So I needed to start somewhere. And frankly, it was a place I could start and work part-time and kind of slowly build my confidence up. It's like all those things can be true. What Arandathi sort of speaks to in that interview, and we'll link to it at the end, is the importance of slowly but surely building up your credentials. So one of the things Arandathi did was she did the company directors course, which Anna, you've also done.
Yes.
Which is essentially the training that you can do, run by the Australian Institute of Company Directors, to learn how to be a board member, to learn what even a board member is, the difference between management and board and all that kind of stuff that, again, I've taken a long time to work out. So that's just one of many things that Arandathi did over many years, just slowly building up her skill set, following a nose, not having to figure it all out at once, and yet can look back from 10 plus years now and go, whoa, I've come a long way. Anna, you had sort of a point on that as well.
Yeah. So when we thought about this, I think we have another slide here. Yes. We're kind of going back to this graph we had at the start, which is that often one thing we don't talk about is that working in this work, we kind of are taking this, what can be a really messy, confusing journey, and then we put a job on top of that is about that in a way. And it can just be really complex is what I'd say. And I saw there was some great comments in the chat before around the complexity of dealing with that, like feeling like if you're not feeling well, that you shouldn't be a peer worker or various things like that. That's just very confusing to work out. And I just wanted to share this idea from a great manager we've come across through the work we do with Big Fields at Work, who said that we come in still in recovery into these roles, if you're in paid roles or volunteer roles or advocacy roles. And what's important is to build your credentials, build your skills, because that will build your agency. And when you do that, that will build your confidence. Like actually how we work in the sector is part of our recovery and is part of how we move through the world. And we need to think about those things as being really linked.
Yeah.
I feel like we should go to this question.
Go.
Cool. Awesome. So we have another interactive question here that we'd love your feedback on, which is, what is an area you secretly wish you could build a little more skills in, even if you don't know how yet? And so, yeah, just give us your answers in the chat. Michelle's in there. Bang on. Media skills. Love it. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to share like a little story, which was about like where doubt has come into my work and been really helpful. So in 2020, I worked as a senior consumer advisor to the Royal Commission that we had in mental health in Victoria. So I was the only person in that kind of lived experience role working there full time. And it was kind of a policy Royal Commission. So that means it was like an opportunity to kind of do the whole hog, like redesign the whole system sort of from the ground up. So it was like a huge opportunity, but also a huge responsibility. And I really felt like, oh no, this is the wrong, like I'm the wrong person in this hot seat. And I came in halfway through and there was a lot of work going on, major policy decisions. Felt like a freight train of policy areas running past me. Everything from like, how do we do maternal mental health screening to like block funding agreements and, you know, just such a wide swathe of areas that I didn't feel like I had a lot of self-doubt basically. I was like, I do not have the expertise in these areas. And so, but the fact was also no one else was in there with those skills either, coming from the lived experience. So sometimes we are truly the best option that is there. And it doesn't feel good. But what really helped is that I took that doubt and then I basically used it to try and get a lot more people in. So at the start, we had me full-time and a couple of part-time people, but we ended up with about 15 people across the Royal Commission. So, and they were working across a whole bunch of different policy teams. And
as in 15 people with lived experience.
Yeah, 15 people with lived experience. Thanks, Graham. As the recommendations were being developed. And I look back now and I'm like, there's stuff that got in there because I was in the room, we were in the room, we did this work that I'm really proud of. And there's also other things in there that I look back on and I go, damn, I've like learned a lot about how these processes work. And this is something I would do differently next time. But actually some of that doubt was really helpful in terms of being like, oh, actually, this is not just a me problem. We need some other people in here.
Yeah, and there's so many awesome answers already in the chat about things people would like to basically build some skills in. The main thing I want to say about all that is like I started by calling this work we do weird and wonderful. It is this weird and wonderful mix of deeply felt personal kind of calling and then all the technical shit you've got to work out to kind of make things happen, right? Whether it's someone mentioned like ways to find better resources for their clients as a peer worker, to how to make social media work for your advocacy. Like there's so many flanks and things to work out, none of which, to go back to Arantha's example, none of which has to happen all at once. It can happen over many years. And as Anna said, none of which has to be you alone. It can be kind of calling on your peers and your elders, as Anna did with the Royal Commission. I will say one last thing on this, which is that for people of a certain disposition, we call them sensitive cats in Big Feels Club. For sensitive, anxious cats, learning new things often feels like failing for a long time until you look back and go, oh, no, I was learning. And that's, maybe there's ways around that. Maybe there's sort of different psychological techniques to balance that out. But fundamentally, maybe it just feels like failing for a while before you realize you're learning.
I love hearing what they want to learn. There's quite a few social media ones in there. One that was like, I'm terrified of social media. I was like, I feel the same way.
Oh, we are right in that mess right now. Don't worry. That's a whole other story. We can talk about that in the Q&A if we get time. I want to keep us moving.
Yes, keep going.
What are we on? Okay, next section. The system needs more doubt. This is where we're going to try and convince you that doubt is actually a good thing. So, okay, recovery is a lot more complex and messy than we often acknowledge. We've already talked about that messy sort of recovery graph with no ending. part of the gift of coming from a lived experience perspective is that we know this intimately. We are intimately acquainted with the mess because most of us are still living it, right? At the same time, as we talked about, there are these more prickly, kind of confident voices in mental health. Mental health is full of confident voices that say the answer is just this. As an example, we'll go to this next slide. Here's a picture of me trying to cure my anxiety by doing what a YouTuber said, which was to wear an eye patch half an hour a day. Wearing an eye patch half an hour a day was supposedly, according to the YouTuber, an evidence-based way to lessen your anxiety. Turned out it was more of an evidence-based way to look like a pirate, which, hey, that has its own value, but it didn't make me any less anxious. Did raise some questions and eyebrows from my colleagues. The point
Just to be clear, this period, this is when I met Graham. I met Graham during this iPad era, and I met him, and I just thought he was a quirky guy. It took me a long time to be like, oh, okay, there's
What
some
are you
stuff
saying?
going on underneath the hood there, really.
So the point is, like, go on Instagram, go on YouTube. There's a million people telling you they got the answer, right? But the same thing can be true in our sector as well. There are some confident voices, and I'm not even saying they're necessarily wholly wrong. It's just that, like, the truth is, if we had an answer that worked 100% of the time for 100% of the people, this work would be a lot more easy. So what I want to say here, just to kind of kick off this section, doubt is good, is we often think of the flip side of all that confidence, self-doubt, as a bad thing. But what if we think about it with just a few different synonyms? So we'll go to that next slide. What if we just try some different synonyms for self-doubt? Do we look at it differently? What if instead of doubt, we say humility, curiosity, or honesty? Being more honest about the mess, saying, hey, actually, I've been struggling for 20 plus years, and whilst I think I'm making progress, some days I wonder. What if we had more humble helpers? I've seen a lot of professional helpers in my time, and I've had some wonderfully helpful professional helpers. The ones that have tended to be the most helpful are the ones who say right from the start, I don't know if I can help you. And then curiosity we'll get to shortly. Anna's going to play us a clip, I think, to illustrate this point.
Yeah. So if we go to the next slide, we have another clip from the Big Feels at Work podcast. This time it's with Ant, who's a legend. And this clip, he's talking about training to be a social worker. And at the time, he was convinced that he didn't belong there because of his own messy life experience. And his lecturer said this very powerful thing to him that stopped him from quitting. So if we can just play that.
I kind of remember
right
looking around the classroom thinking, like, everyone seems shiny and I don't know. So I went to speak with my lecturer in tears about this. And I just said to her, listen, I don't belong here and I'm going to leave. And I'll never forget this. She was so tender. And she just said, Ant, please don't leave. We need people just like you here. And one of the most powerful things you can ever say to someone is, I don't know. Oh, fuck, man. Like, even now, that just hits me so hard. So that there was such a pivotal point for me right then. I continued to, carry all my doubt stuff. But from right then, I just felt the power of the I don't know.
Hell yes.
I love that clip from Ant. So Ant, he studied as a social worker, as I said, but he went on to become a lived experience worker and ended up managing a whole team of lived experience workers and really continued to draw on the having that space for the humility, the curiosity in what he does. You can listen to more of that episode. We'll give you as the link to the full podcast at the end. And so in some ways that can be part of our superpower as lived experience advocates is we have more of an opportunity to say, I don't know. And to give one very short example, I remember when I was working as a peer worker and I'd sit in on clinical reviews, and clinical reviews can be quite, I would say jargony. Like there can be a lot of jargon that gets used in those areas. And I remember I felt like my role was actually to be the person asking the I don't know questions And it allowed me that space to do that. So for instance, when someone would say, well, this person, their behavior is not compatible with community treatment, I would say, what does that mean? I don't know. What does that mean? And I actually got feedback from some of the clinicians that was really helpful, because none of the other clinicians felt comfortable asking that question because they were the professionals who should know. But actually that asking some of those questions in those spaces enabled more critical conversation in those team meetings about, actually, does this make sense what we're doing here? So I just wanted to share that.
All right, next slide, please. So here's kind of another way to look at this. Advocating from your personal experience, whatever the topic, can kind of engender two opposite tendencies. And they're both really important tendencies. One is a kind of confidence, this sort of feeling of, I have the answer if only they'd listen to me. This was me in my 20s when I was first working as a peer worker. When I say confident, I don't mean I necessarily knew what the hell I was doing as a peer worker. That was a lot of being thrown in the deep end. But I at least had this sense of like, I've had a really certain not so great experience of the mental health system. Here are the things that need to change. So there was a real kind of certainty, a real kind of, I would say, for me anyway, that came out in quite a strident way, quite a, confident about the things that needed to be different or needed to change. It wasn't until many years into my career that I started to listen to the kind of balancing voice to that confident, strident voice. And so the confident voice, really important. But what I started to notice many years into my career was this underneath that confidence voice was often this quieter little voice going, yeah, but are you sure though? Like that's the voice that goes, gosh, sometimes I'm pretty glad I'm not in charge because there's some really complex, nuanced questions that need to be answered in this great big messy system of ours. So how do you balance those two voices becomes the question. And one of the ways I think about it is the confident, strident, this needs to change now voice. First of all, that's usually where we start. And when you haven't been listened to for a long time, that's really the only starting point is, hey, here's what needs to change. And it needs to be confident, it needs to be brash, it needs to be loud. And it's often what I call the tear it down energy. It's like the thing that goes, this is the problem, we need to change it. But it's the curious voice, the quieter, not so sure, curious voice that we need to listen to when we're then thinking about what are we going to change things to? What is the thing that comes next? Because the truth is, most of us are still working that out. Most of us are still working it out personally, what we even need on our own recovery journey, let alone as a group working out what collectively we need. And honestly, the thing that kind of most humbled me into this kind of listening more to the curious voice is I got the chance to be in charge of setting up or helping to set up services. I got the chance to be in charge of Big Feels Club with honor. And it's like you get that kind of humbling experience of, gosh, I thought I had all the answers. I have some, but I'm still working out the others. So these kind of two energies, and again, they're both really important. But the point I want to make here is that temperamentally, you might find yourself drawn towards one or two of these poles. So I have a great friend and mentor who's totally at the confident end of the spectrum. And thank God I've been in meetings with him where I'm just 1,000 times grateful that he's there saying the confident brash thing. But I'm more, especially these days as I get older, I'm more the curious, are we so sure? What about this? What if end of the spectrum? And it can often feel uncomfortable. I've often beat myself up for not having the answer. And so I like this framing of rather than confident and unconfident, it's kind of confident and curious. And you can, all of us have a bit of both. And it's a question of when you use each. But there's also this kind of sense in which maybe some of us are more one than the other, and that's okay too, because we're all kind of in this work together. Cool. I think that was the guts of that one. Anna, anything to add there? Oh, this next slide actually.
There is another slide, yes.
Yes. So I suppose what I'm really getting is it's kind of the difference between saying, if I don't have the answer, I shouldn't work in this field, and instead saying, I'm willing to sit with the discomfort of not always having the answer, and this itself has value.
I want to shout out Renee. I hope I'm saying this right. Renee. Okay. But anyway, this is a great comment. It says, fumble forward, name it, own it, repair it, normalize doubt, don't idolize certainty. Name your discomfort, be more curious than defensive, reflect often, deflect rarely.
Beautiful. I love what Emma's saying too. Thank you so much for naming this. I've often worried I'm not the right fit for this work because I'm not confident enough. This is the thing, right? Like,
one thing that I found really helpful is like, I had a great person I worked with from the US who was like an amazing advocate, done a lot of like really awesome work. And he was like, sometimes you need those really confident, strident voices. And you also need those people that are more kind of, I think he said diplomats. So you need people in different areas of the system with different kind of temperaments and different approaches. And they actually are part of an ecosystem that's working together, even if it doesn't always necessarily look like that. So I found that really helpful, particularly because I understand what you mean, Emma. And I feel similarly.
Can we go to that next slide? Just to put a button on this one. It ain't just us, people. Like, it's not just lived experience workers. So one of the crazy things about running the Big Feels of Work podcast is I hear from a ton of clinicians with big feelings, many of whom are not out at work. There's a heck of a lot out there. So anyway, this is just from a couple of psychologists. I think I got these messages within an hour of each other or something stupid like that, where it's like just two different people having the exact same experience, which is, as a clinician, I feel like I'm supposed to have the answer, but I haven't figured it out for myself yet. So I feel like a fake. And then the other person was saying, I feel like a fraud. It's all the same stuff. And I've got, dozens of these messages from people in all sorts of different roles. Anyway, we'll move on to our last little interactive question, which is, Anna.
When has doubt been helpful for you in your work or your life, even if it didn't feel good at the time? So we'll give you a minute to ponder over this question. And we'll be reading all your comments. Thanks, Hayley.
We don't have too much time to go because we want to get to the Q&A, but I might just read a couple out. This one here from Renee. Doubt taught me how to be curious. Curiousness is a strength. So I'm not doubtful now, I'm curious to know if there are other ways, learnings, doings. Yeah, I love that. And one thing I'll say on that just quickly is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the work of Judson Brewer. He's a researcher in America, researches anxiety and the brain. And he talks about how the opposite of anxiety and fear is not courage, it's curiosity. And you actually cannot be afraid when you are curious. It's his theory anyway. I challenge you. But it's a lovely idea. And he even has this little thing that he offers that I'll just do because we can do this live. This little sound you can make when you're feeling particularly like nervous before you speak up at a meeting or whatever it might be. I mean, maybe you wouldn't make the sound in the meeting, but around the house I do this. It's just making a little sound of curiosity internally, like,
when
Oh,
Graham first.
I just got an email from my boss. Ooh, I wonder what that is. I'm not terrified at all. Anyway, it's a fun little exercise. Oh, no, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, when you first read that, again, this is the same eye patch vibes. You're holding strong, Graham, but I remember I could just hear you around the house, just like just in various rooms. I'm like, he's nervous about something.
We'll move on to our last little bit, which is just we promised you one thing that really helps. And
I actually wanted that Paula said it already.
Yeah.
Paula said it in the chat. Paula said a little while ago, I've been doing this work for over 27 years and I can still have days of self-doubt. It is when I talk with another person struggling with their day that my confidence reemerges and I remember why I'm here. So thank you, Paula.
Exactly. So the thing that really helps, we've found, is safety in numbers. And that's the whole thing of the Big Feels Club. It's like, hey, wouldn't it be nice to know you're not the only one? So we've been doing that this whole session. You've been doing that this whole day. You'll do it again tomorrow. That's what conferences like these offer. And they're not, there's not heaps of these spaces, so it's pretty special. It is also something that we offer through Big Feels Club and through, for those of you working in mental health or wanting to work in mental health, through Big Feels at Work as well. So we'll just go on to that little... Oh, this is a first little recap. Do you want to do this or do you want me to?
You can go for it.
So yeah, just to recap, 3 points really. 1, this work is messy. So no wonder it can feel confusing, doubt-filled. Remember that wiggly, windy recovery path. That's what this whole system as a whole is on. And we're all just working it out as we go. Number 2 here, the self-doubt is baked into that work by very definition of the messiness of it. And then finally, yeah, self-doubt might be exactly what the system needs more of if we think of that in terms of humility, curiosity, and honesty, which I've been hearing in spades in the comments in this session. So you've already got it, right? It's just about kind of thinking about it as our gift, as our strength, as the thing we bring.
And just to finish off just the next slide, we just want to say thanks for having us. You can check out the Big Feels at Work podcast, which we have played a few clips from today.
So we'll go back to that previous slide, yeah.
Oh, no, that's fine. And
I just want to make sure people get that link.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I will put the link in the chat in just 1 second. And if you want to stay in touch with our work more generally, you can sign up to our monthly Big Feels Club newsletter. Each month, we send out a personal essay about life and long-term big feelings. People say nice things about it. So you can check it out. I'll put the link in the chat in just a second. And if you're a manager, we also do bring Big Feels at Work to your organization, and you can just get in touch with us. Our email is on the next slide.
Last slide there. Feel free
Thank
to
you so much
reach
to
out.
all the Finding North team for putting this on and for having us along. This has been great.
Yeah, and thanks for everyone for your beautiful comments in the chat, or even if you were just sitting back and lurking politely. That's us, Jess, if you want to take over.
That's okay. I'll just steal some of your time. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Your organization is not something I'd heard of before, and it's definitely intriguing, and it's something that I'll be taking on board to review and work with the people I work with in the industry as well. So thank you so much for that. We have a couple of Q&As, but I just wanted to touch on and thank the audience for their vulnerability in the chat. The level of comments that were made that were vulnerable to personal situations was actually quite staggering, and you two should be very proud of yourselves that you were able to bring that out in the audience, because it's not easy to bring people to a space where they feel completely safe to say those things. And I know that it's online and it's not in person, so it makes it a little bit different, but a lot of the stuff that was said was things that I know a lot of us will have related to. Personally, like I've been in situations as a peer worker in previous jobs where I've had problems with imposter syndrome, whereby clinicians haven't wanted to take my input on board as a lived experience worker, even though like I knew more than them about the scenario. So do you know what I mean? So if I talk about Like I suffer from bipolar, for example. They had someone who it was an AOD, an alcohol and drug situation, and it was trying to describe like what they're experiencing is actually like along the lines of the spectrum of that, and kind of having those comments dismissed is actually really disheartening. It stops you wanting to speak up again. But at the same time, like for me personally, it flipped it around on the other side, and it makes me do this work now where I work for myself and I go out to organizations and I try and teach them about stigma and language and things like that. So one of the things you touched on was, you know, your own experiences and how to flip those around. And I think that's a really great thing to hear. And it's really positive. So thank you for that from me personally. So one of the questions that has come through is questioning a clinician as a peer worker can be daunting, which is ironically what I've just said. So questioning a clinician as a peer worker can be daunting. How did you get to that stage where you felt that you could?
Oh,
That's a good question.
It's a big one, isn't it?
That's a good question.
Can I start by naming that there's so much context in that scenario as well, isn't there? So Honor and I had quite different contexts where we started our career. So we both started as peer workers, but I started at a place in Auckland called Mind and Body, which was run by crazy people. Like it was literally we had an article about us in the newspaper once. They did a big spread called "The Lunatics Are Running the Asylum" because that was the concept. It was a peer-run mental health initiative way before that was a thing. Yeah. So for me, I was just surrounded day to day by other people who got it. And so when I went out into working, you know, I would come from that home base to go do my work with clients in hospitals and go to psych reviews and things with them if they wanted me to. And for me, it was just like totally natural to push back and question. But that was because the context was so unusual. And it wasn't until I came to Australia and worked at a mainstream mental health organization that I was like, oh, that's really unusual. Yeah. And I found myself kind of doing that less and less. And that was an interesting kind of part of my experience was needing to slowly find that courage and confidence again, which for me personally came through once I moved to Australia, because I come from New Zealand, was slowly building up my peer contacts again. Yeah. Because it's only in kind of the truth is a lot of the time, as you were describing, Jess, it's like you might say something and in a certain scenario just be ignored. And that might be 9 out of 10 times. The key is like, where do I take that? Yeah. Who do I go and unpack that extremely fucking personal experience with?
Punch in the gut type scenario.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's a great phrase for it because it hurts. Like it hurts when you say something that isn't taken seriously when it comes from a deep personal place. But I just want to name, so for me, I had this kind of strange, so there's a contextual difference there. And Honor, I'll throw to you now, because you, on the other hand, you worked in a very clinical setting right from the beginning, and you were like one of 2 peer workers in a team of a bunch of clinicians. So how was it different for you, and how did you do that?
Well, firstly, I just want to say, like, I totally feel you, Jess, and what's often so hard is having when you've got skin in the game, right? And I feel like there's so many layers to like things are getting questioned, but you're also like, are people questioning me and my, like in some ways it's like my sanity at the same, like this isn't just a professional conversation. So that makes it quite complicated. One thing I'm thinking of is I remember like at some point I had a great person I worked with and he gave me a name which was the Smiling Assassin. So he was like, he was like that, you know, you're really powerful because you have that role to play, which is you can be questioning but like with a smile, if that makes sense. And I'm not saying everyone has to do that. I'm just saying that has been, I know that that's been an approach that I've taken. So in terms of like questioning people, like I would say like I would kind of play dumb sometimes, like literally be like, but partly because like some things you're like, I'm trying to understand how, for instance, what we're doing here with this person on a compulsory treatment order, how does that actually fit with the Mental Health Act because this person, as from what we're talking about, it doesn't sound like they meet that criteria. So why are we doing that?
Of course.
And it's not necessarily like most of the time it's not going to change the outcome in that moment. Is that fair to say? It's sort of you're playing a longer game in a sense there.
I feel like it's mixed, and I feel like what's hard is that often peer workers are employed as support workers, but actually their other job that's not in their position description is about cultural change and systemic change.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the more longer term thing where that's really like that. Those are different things you're kind of trying to do at once, and keeping those in balance can be quite a task.
Yes, they can. I completely agree. So some of the other questions we've received is regarding the future of your company and what plans you've got. So I'm going to leave those questions because one of the things that I keep forgetting to say and I keep getting prompted by the team is that we are recording the session, and it will be available as a link following the symposium finish. So everything that's been spoken about today, and including your fantastic presentation that you've given today, and all of your contact details will be provided to everybody. And I'm sure that you might have some people reach out and ask you some questions, which, judging by your demeanor, you won't have a problem answering them. But I just want to take a moment and just say thank you so much for everything that you're doing. And the way in which you presented today was so clear and enjoyable to listen to when it's about such a stigmatized topic. So it was actually a really enlightening way to hear things. So thank you so much for that.
Thanks so much for having us, to everyone. And thank you again to everyone who's come along and for sharing so generously with our questions. It's just been really awesome. And I hope to get the chat.
Yeah, come find us. Come join us. Big Feels Club. We'd love to have you.
Thanks for watching. Explore more Perspectives 2025 on Finding North Network's YouTube channel. Find out more by visiting findingnorthnetwork.com.au or email info@findingnorthnetwork.com.au.